But we have Don W. from Greensburg, Indiana. I think God, as we understand him, or as I do, seemed to think that Don's job wasn't done here in southeastern Indiana. He wouldn't let him go. And I'm glad that he didn't. You know, when I first met this man, I was in a treatment center for alcoholism, and I never did like him when I first saw him at first, because he was standing there lying to me, I thought. He said he had 13 kids and he was happy. Now, anyone knows, you know, just coming off that booze, how in the world can anybody have 13 kids and be happy? I say he's lying. But I found, through close association with this gentleman in this southeastern Indiana intergroup and the fellowship of all the meetings that we have in this area, and we do have some good ones. As a matter of fact, I believe we have the greatest. But I found that Don is a happy person, and he's always willing to share his experience, strength, and hope with another alcoholic. Because when I first saw him that night, I didn't know him from Adam, and I couldn't hardly believe him so much with his story. I got him to come back to my room, and he stayed for another hour. Now, anybody with 13 kids would be in a hurry to get home, or vice versa, I thought. But anyway, we're certainly glad here in southeastern Indiana that Don didn't leave us and go to Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. We're so glad that he's here with us, and I couldn't think of a better way, or the group, or the intergroup couldn't think of a better way to get this conference kicked off in a good manner. So if you will you all help me in welcoming Don W.
Thank you, Bob. You ain't any happier than I am to be back in this part of the country. When I left Wisconsin Rapids last March, there was about 3 feet of snow on the ground, and I think it was around 20 degrees, and you didn't get around too much up there in that country. So I was kind of happy to come back home. After all, this is my home, and the people I love, and the people I sobered up with and helped me stay sober. So I'm just tickled to death to be back, and I hope this is where I stay. I think we've kind of got settled back down here in Indiana now again. In fact, we even had a home bought up there, and miracles happen. And tonight, I would like to share some of those with you as I share my experience with you, what has happened. As I tell what's happened to me, I'm just a success story is exactly what it is. Nothing but success. I had to suffer enough and drink enough to get to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think even then the miracles were happening to me through my drinking years. I surely wasn't aware of them, but they sure did happen to me as I look back today. I really am not a speaker by no means. This is not my cup of tea. I would rather sit on the side of a bed in a hospital or in a hotel room or across the table in a meeting place and share with other alcoholics. This is my cup of tea. I like to eyeball them alcoholics, you know, and I just love to do that because I can see a person come to life and see the hope come back in their eyes, and this is what it's all about. And I hope maybe tonight I might say something that might give somebody a little hope that there is a better way of living. I found that better way of living through Alcoholics Anonymous. I started drinking when I wanted to. And I quit drinking when I wanted to, after I found Alcoholics Anonymous. I never did have to quit drinking. I had to want to quit drinking. And that's where it got in my life. There's one thing that kept me out there on the streets a long time, and it's kept many an alcoholic out there, and there's many out there today and tonight suffering from the disease of alcoholism. Many of these people have been contacted by Alcoholics Anonymous, one way or another. But there's one thing that keeps them from coming in these doors, and that's our pride. And that almost killed me. So I've got to tell you a little bit of story to get this thing opened up and for me to relax, and I may end up taking my coat off before it's all over. But I heard this story quite a few years ago, and there's another old boy that's going to be here this weekend, and he told me quite a while ago, he said, you know, when you hear a joke or hear a story, once or twice you can take it and keep it for your own, you know. So I've taken a few of them, but a lot of them I can't remember, and there's a couple over here tonight that and I still can't remember. But before the meeting, we were out walking around the parking lot, and I heard this story about the two bulls. And I started telling this dude, and I had it all in my mind before I started, but I got about halfway through it and right down to the punchline, and son of a gun, I forgot what the punchline was. And my mind's a blank yet, Eileen, I still can't remember. By the way, Don Winning is my name, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. But you see, there was this Irishman named Mike, and this describes me pretty well. He was a feisty little guy and real proud, and he was a little short guy, and he's always getting into fights, and he always ended up being real brave. And some of his friends wanted to go bear hunting up in the northern country, and they asked Mike if he'd go along with them, and Mike said, well, sure. And the next morning before they got ready to leave, they got all their equipment and stuff loaded up in their truck, and they said to Mike, where's your gun? He said, I don't need a gun. Well, you can't go hunting them bears unless you've got a gun. He said, no, I hunt them barehanded. So they said, okay, Mike. So they all got in the truck and they went up into the hills and got their cabin, got settled down for the evening. And the next morning they got all up early and ready to go out to hunt these bears. And then they was leaving, you know, they said, Mike, you better stay behind. Mike said, no, I'm going with you. So they all took off out in the woods, and here's Mike following behind, you see. And during the course of that day, Mike got lost from his friends. And all at once he found himself all alone out there in the wilderness, and his friends were gone. And he turned around, and he kind of got scared, you know, and all at once out behind a big tree, a bear jumped out. And Mike liked to dive. And he took off running. And he ran, and he fell through the briars and stumbled over the logs and picked himself up, and the bear kept getting closer right on his tail, just breathing right down, you know, and he was getting scratched and going across creeks and fell, you know, and picked himself up, and the bear kept getting closer. And just as he was about ready to give up, he just couldn't go any longer. He comes out into a clearing, and there's the cabin, about 500 yards out there in the opening. And he makes a beeline for the door, you know, just as fast as he could go, and the bear's right on his tail. And he gets about 10 feet from the door. He hollers out to his friends, open the door, fellas. And they open the door, and Mike starts through the door, and he stumbles on the steps and fell flat on his face. And the bear went in on top of him, went right in the cabin. Mike gets up real quick and pulls the door shut, brushes himself off and says, fellas, kill that SOB, and I'll go get another one. So that's about the way I was, you know. That's pretty proud. But this pride of mine is a terrible thing, and it got me into a lot of trouble. And it does most of us alcoholics. And like I said before, many of us go to our graves because we don't want to admit that we can't handle the booze. And I didn't. I didn't want to handle it. I didn't want to admit that I couldn't handle it. It says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that we tell what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And we could all go back to our rooms pretty early because I could make it real short, you know. I drank too damn much, too long, and almost died from drinking, and I found Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm sober today. But you see, you people didn't drive all that way to hear somebody and get out here in this big crowd and sitting here now to hear me get up here and say 3 words and sit down. I think I was brought all the way back here from Wisconsin Rapids to tell something to somebody. And it may be that somebody might be me. Because I feel like I'm the most important person here tonight. Because if I don't stay sober, then I'm no good to myself, nobody else. So my primary purpose is to stay sober and to help some other alcoholic. And I think probably this is my purpose here tonight, is to share with you people what happened to me, how I found Alcoholics Anonymous, and what I've done with my life since I've been here with you people. I talk frequently at one of our hospitals here in this area, and I enjoy talking to those people. You can see what happens, that you can see them change, and many of them don't make it. Thank God that I stuck around long enough that I found what you people had to offer. I started drinking early in life, about 17, 18 years old. I never intended to become an alcoholic. I never wanted to, brag about how much I drank. I never could handle booze from the beginning. I know there were a lot of times, you'd be sitting in the bar and we'd brag about how loaded we got last night, and all the big deals we pulled. And I seemed to be different than some of these other people. I felt bad about what I had done last night. A lot of the times I didn't remember what I had done last night. And this fear, of not knowing, I just, it's hell for the alcoholic. I just couldn't live with all that fear in me, and the remorse and guilt of not knowing what I had done or what I'd said. Most alcoholics drink for a reason, and I really couldn't tell you why I drank. I didn't know why I drank, for a long time. And it wasn't until I got to AA that I realized why I drank. I always thought I had to drink. I always thought that I had to drink because everybody else drank in order to relax and be comfortable around people. I had to have so much booze in me, to relax. And I found out after I got to Alcoholics Anonymous that there was another reason why I drank and why I kept on drinking and why I got to this point in our lives where we talk about being hopeless and helpless and this point of no return, when you pray to die and death would be sweet to me. I've had those feelings in my life. But I never started out to become an alcoholic. I don't think any of us do. I never came to Alcoholics Anonymous breaking the doors down to get here. This is the last place I wanted to be. And I tried not to get here for a long time, trying to control my drinking. I got drunk the first time I drank an amount of alcohol. And I always want to remember that first drunk. And there's another drunk that I don't want to forget, and that's my last one. There's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous that if you forget your last drunk, you haven't had it yet. And I believe this. That's why I stick close to this fellowship. I allow to forget what I was like and what happened to me. But I'll never forget the first drunk. I was just turned 18 years old. I was in Sanson, New York Naval Training Station back in 1944. And we had our 7-day boot leave. And prior to this, I had drank very little alcohol. Maybe a beer or two or something, after school. Because I went in the Navy right after I got out of high school. My parents never drank. There was no alcohol around our home. I was born and raised on a farm down in southern Decatur County. And there just wasn't any booze down there, and we just didn't drink. So I wasn't brought up in an atmosphere of drinking. There just wasn't any drinking in my family. So I get in the Navy, and of course, when I was in high school, after a football game or a basketball game, why, we'd stop in this little beer tavern. Back then, you didn't have to be 21 years old to drink beer. So we'd stop in there, and we'd have maybe a glass or two of beer, and I'd go on home. And I never drank enough of this stuff, to ever get a good feeling. So I didn't know really what it felt like. But on this boot leave, coming back from Sanson, New York, we had about a 2-hour layover in Buffalo, New York. And we're standing around in this station, waiting for this train to move out to Indianapolis. And there were 3 or 4 other fellows that I was with from Indianapolis. And one of them said, well, why don't we go downtown and see what Buffalo's like? And I said, okay. I became a follower after that. And so we went downtown, and I remember those flashing lights, those neon lights. Beer, liquor, dancing, and all this thing, this line across the sidewalk. The first one we come to, the fellow said, well, let's go in here and get us a drink. And I said, okay. So we went inside, and we stood up to the bar. There's 4 of us, 5 including me. And the bartender said, well, what do you fellas have? And the first guy up at the end said, well, I'll have one of those shots. And the other one said, well, I'll have the same. And I said, okay, I'll have one too. See, I became a follower. And I kind of mimicked what these other fellows were saying. So they took these little glasses off the shelf. Now, mind you, I'd never been in a regular bar where they served whiskey. And I didn't know what these little sharp glasses were for. I didn't even know what they were for. And what them big brown bottles were up on the bar. I didn't know what they were. And so he brought one of these bottles off the shelf, and he poured these little glasses full, and these fellows down the line, and he pours mine full. And the guys on the end took it up, and just downed it right down. They got down to me, and I watched this guy next to me as he tipped it up there, and just took it right down and went, and I thought, boy, it must be good. So I got it up there, and I kind of put it in, up some of that stuff in my mouth, and I swallowed some, and immediately I choked, and I got half of it up my nose, and it burnt, and I couldn't get my breath, and I stood there, tears running down my eyes, and I thought, my God, how can they drink that stuff? And I stood there, and the fellow said, you'll be all right, just sometimes it's kind of hard to get that first one down. I didn't know what they meant. So they had another drink, and I wasn't about to pass that one up, and they asked bartender, you want yours full? And I said, sure. I wasn't going to, be no party pooper. So this guy said next to me, he said, I'll tell you how you do it. You just take a big, deep breath, hold your breath, and just throw it down in there. So when it come my turn, I took a big, deep breath, and I opened my mouth real big, and I held my breath, and I just threw it in there. And it went right down. And I stood there, and all at once, it started to come back up. And I started that swallowing business, trying to keep that thing down in there, and I really didn't want it in there, but I wasn't going to, throw up in front of those friends of mine. Hell, I wasn't going to be no party people. So I kept swallowing, and I finally got that dude to stay down there. And we had 2 more of those while we stood there. And the next thing you know, I'm standing there, and all at once something's coming over me. And I feel it tear down into my toes. Something's happening down in my feet. And it starts creeping up my legs, and I look down there, seeing what the hell it is. And it's starting to crawl right up my body, and it's starting to get hot. Oh, and I can just feel it. And where I felt it the most was right on the tip of my ears. Dan, they just got red hot. And I felt good. I felt good. And when we turned around and walked out of there, man, I was just kind of leaving the floor, as we walked out of that place. We walked on down the street, and we had about 4 more of those joints and repeated the same thing. The next thing I remember was that we were walking back up the street, And we had one of those big brown bottles this time. We were passing it back and forth. And I was just taking a big drink out of that dude, and going, like these other guys were. And that's the last thing I remember. I come to the next day sometime, late in the afternoon, in a strange bed, strange place, with a strange woman looking over me. And I was to be in that position a few times later on. And I asked her where I was. And she said, well, don't you know? And I said, why, no. She said, well, you're in Indianapolis with Johnny. He brought you home with him. You kind of got sick. And I had gotten sick and thrown up all over that blue uniform, brand new. And it looked terrible, white, green, and yellow, all over the front of this Navy uniform. And immediately I felt ashamed, and I wanted to get the hell out of there. And I didn't want to be there. I didn't want anybody to see me. So I told her I had to get to the bus station to get home. She said, well, as soon as Johnny gets back, I'll have him take you down to the bus station. So Johnny comes back, and he hauls me to the bus station to get a bus ride from Indianapolis to Greensburg. And that's about 50 miles. And I get on that bus, and every mile that chugs off, I'm getting sicker, and I'm getting shakier, and I'm feeling worse, and I don't want to go home. What am I going to tell my mother? What is she going to say? What can I say? And I didn't want to get off of that bus when I got in Greensburg, and I swore to myself, I'll never drink that rotten stuff again. That was on my first drink. I was already making promises that I'd never do it again. I'll never drink that damn stuff again. We pulled up right downtown in Greensburg at the bus stop, and I got out of that bus, and there wasn't any taxi there because that's the only way I was going to get out to the farm. And the taxi stand was down the block, about half of a block down the way, right in front of a tavern. And I remember very vividly of me walking kind of like this towards the building so nobody out on the street could see my front of my uniform. I was ashamed. I absolutely was ashamed. And I get in front of that bar, and I'm standing there, and the taxi wasn't there, so I walked inside. And the bartender come up to me, and he says, my God, man, you've been like you've been in a hell of a fight. And I said, oh, it was in a terrible fight. And he said, you look like you need a drink. And I said, yeah, I sure do. And he said, what kind do you have? And I said, just give me one of them little glasses out of that brown bottle up there. And he goes to get that little glass, and he sets it down, and he gets that brown bottle. And he pours me a drink, and I got her right down there. I had about 4 or 5 of those drinks, and the taxi pulls up, and I walked right out of that bar like I owned the damn thing, right out on the street. I didn't feel guilty or ashamed anymore. And I got right in that taxi, and I went right on out to the farm. It was about 10 miles out in the country, and a little closer I got to home, I was wondering, what am I going to tell my mother? And he pulls up in the driveway of the old farmhouse, and my mother comes out off of the back porch, and she runs out to the gate. And I get out of the cab, and I walk up to the gate, and my mother, tears running down her eyes, and she's saying, my son, what happened to you? And I said, Mother, some guy on the bus got sick and threw up on me. You see, I was starting that lying, too, real early. Making up them stories. And I was to practice this little deal for the next 20 years. I swore to God I never was going to drink that stuff anymore. That was it. I had 5 days of my 7-day leave left. I spent 4 nights of those up in the town of Greensburg, absolutely plastered to the gills. And I swore to God I never was going to drink that stuff. As I look back over my life today, I had some of the feelings, most of them, on my first drunk that I had on my last. I had the guilt, I had the shame, I had the remorse, I swore to God I never was going to drink anymore. All these feelings, I had them all on my first drunk. And I had those same feelings on my last drunk. I have come to believe that I was an alcoholic from the very beginning. I was powerless over that drink from the very beginning. I had no control, absolutely none. And from there on out, I began this hideous thing that us alcoholics have to go through until we're all through. And that's trying to control that booze, trying to not get sick, trying to keep out of trouble. I spent 20 years trying to be able to drink that stuff and not get sick and not get into trouble. And that's all I ever got the next 20 years was sick and trouble. But not once did I admit to myself through all these years that I couldn't handle that little drink. I could not admit that. This is that terrible pride that we alcoholics carry inside of us, and many of us carry it to the grave. I have come to believe that in every alcoholic's life, there comes a moment of truth when God, in all of his infinite glory and power and love for us people, gives us a moment of clear-mindedness and truth that we can see ourselves. And I feel that unless we take advantage of that moment, that many of us never get another chance to sober up. I think at that moment we know what we are, and he also manifests some chance of recovery within our means. But what happens to many of us, that we fail to admit it and fail to seek this help that's made available to us. I spent 20 years fighting that bottle. I could stand up here probably all night and tell you where I went and what I'd done. I tried everything. I tried absolutely everything there was to control this drinking, to keep out of trouble. I married at an early age of 26 years old. I was immature. I surely wasn't ready for it. I was a full-blown alcoholic, but I sure didn't know it. I didn't know anything about the disease of alcoholism. I married this beautiful little Italian gal, and their family all drank, and that was fine with me. Her father made this homemade red Dago wine, and I'd get a little of that in me, on top of some of the other booze I had. And man, that'll make you talk to yourself. But she didn't know there was anything wrong with me either. And I never really thought there was anything wrong with me. I always blamed all of my problems and misfortunes on other people and situations. You see, I didn't have the ability to be honest with myself. I didn't have that. And I couldn't find it anyplace. You see, there's one thing that kept me from admitting that I had a problem with booze, and that was this pride of mine. And to show you some instances in this pride, how it affected me and how it almost destroyed a marriage and a family. As I drank, my disease progressed. And, of course, the first way I suffered was I suffered financially. We started having a family as soon as we got married, and every child that came along, I couldn't face the responsibility of another child. I just couldn't make enough money to support all these children that all at once seemed to be dropped on me. I hadn't wanted them. I had only started out. I remember me and my wife talking before we got married. She asked me one time, how many kids you want to have? And I said, about 2. And we went past that 2 and went on past 6. And I never could figure out what was causing it. She always claimed I never was home. So I started thinking that maybe there's somebody else you know. And I'm getting pretty desperate about this time after we'd had 6 children, and I'm owing everybody, and I'm getting these bill collectors calling me and finance companies on me, you know, and I'm wanting to get the pressure off. My wife was telling me long before this that if I would just quit drinking, or if I wouldn't drink the way I drank. Why can't I drink like Joe down the street? And Joe didn't drink. And Joe wasn't happy. Joe was out there in the yard every night with his kids, you know, playing with them, and he was out there raking leaves and cutting grass and this kind of thing, and Joe was miserable. Hell, who wanted to be like Joe? You know, he wasn't having any fun. Now, I'd get off of work, you know, and I'd head for the bar. And I'd be in there with my friends, you know, telling them how all the big deals I pulled that day and how successful I was and all this kind of stuff, see? And these guys was eating it up. Hell, I had friends in them bars. I found out pretty quick that I couldn't drink at home, you know. Who wants to drink, you know, when you're getting chewed out every 2 minutes? I like to be comfortable when I drank. And I sure couldn't be comfortable around this gal because she kept bitching at me, you know, just continuously. And so I got away. I was the guy that run away. My kids did, and their dad run off, you know. But this disease of alcoholism progressed, and I kept getting worse, and the financial problems increased, and we were renting houses. I'm basically a renter, you see. And I couldn't own anything. I didn't want to, because I knew if I did, I'd have to be moving on, you know. And I didn't want to be tied down to a few days of signing papers and all this type of thing, you know. I wanted to be able to get out right now. And most of the times, that's the way it was. We moved quite a few times, you know. And most of the times, it was about midnight or after. I'd back that old U-Haul trailer up to the door, you know, in the middle of the night, dark. The landlord sure wouldn't be out them hours of the night, you know. And we'd move on, 2 or 3 months behind on the rent. They was about ready to turn the electricity off if they hadn't already done so. So things were getting pretty rough in our life, and I didn't understand why this was all happening to me. This is normal for an alcoholic, I know today, but I didn't understand why all this stuff was happening to me. Why was I having all the bad luck, and why was people so against me, you know? Why? Hell, I was a pretty good-looking fella, and I thought I worked hard, you know, and I'd sit in them bars, you know, and look in that mirror, and hell, all the things that I'd done for everybody, you know, none of them appreciated it. I just couldn't understand. So I started this business of moving, you know, trying to get away from me. And I thought, well, I'll get clear the hell out of the state. See, I'll get clear away from these bill collectors and these people that I drink with. So I started this tour, you know, of running away from these problems. And I come to believe and find out that every place I ended up, I run smack dab into me. You know, I forgot to leave me back there where I started. I could find myself in another bar, you know, making new friends in a new town. And in a few days, hell, it was just normal for me to walk in this bar and say, hi, Joe, and hi, John, you know. Hell, I knew all the bartenders by first names, just in a few days. So I took this tour around the country, you know, out to Colorado, out to Phoenix, Arizona, on down to Louisiana, and then, you know, nothing got any better. And I finally ends up back home, a lot worse than when I left. So I just I couldn't figure out why things wouldn't get any better. What, you know, why? Why me, God, you know? And I started this business of denying there was a God and starting to hate God. Start not wanting to go to church. Nothing was working. I tried this church bit and it wasn't working either. So I was trying, you know, at this time. This was 6, 7, 8 years before I finally arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous, trying to find ways to cut down or to quit or the problems to cease, and it just didn't get any better. It just kept getting worse. We were losing everything we wanted out of life. I was. And to show you another example of this pride, one particular weekend, I was on one heck of a drunk, and I had gotten down low mentally, and I threatened to shoot myself. Of course, I didn't have guts to do this. And I had my wife call the priest, get him over there, so he could save me from committing suicide. And he comes over, and I brainwashed him in just a short time. And he kind of left, talking to himself. But as a result of that, my mother and father walked in the house right after he had left. In fact, they met him out in the yard. And they came in, and my father was a very mild-mannered man at this time in my life. He had a lot of problems with his heart, and he wasn't very well. And I remember this man sitting in the living room. My mother took my wife back in the kitchen. And this man, around 68 years old, 67 or 68 years old, he sat there on the couch and he cried. And he begged me to do something about my life. And he told me about my drinking. And there wasn't anything I could tell him. There wasn't anything I could tell him. All I could tell him was, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, And they left. And the next morning, it was a Sunday morning, this brother-in-law of mine, who I hadn't seen now for the past 4 years because he quit drinking. And I didn't like him. He was one of them reformed drunks. And he never would come over to my house anymore. And, of course, by this time I wasn't welcome at anybody's house, so I didn't end up at anybody's house anyway. So he comes walking in my kitchen, and I said, well, Pee-wee, what the hell are you doing here? And he said, Don, I come over here to talk about your drinking. And I said, what drinking? You see. And just prior to this, about 4 days, we were losing this home that I had bought through my GI Bill of Rights and had failed to make the payments on it, and the government was taking it back. And I'd lost my business. Like I say, the bill collectors were calling me every day, and the bankers and the finance companies. And death would have been sweet to me. I had these moments of committing suicide, of driving the car into a bridge abutment, but I just never had the guts to pull the steering wheel. And, this is that pride. I couldn't swallow that pride. I couldn't get honest with myself to admit that, booze had me licked. I can't handle this stuff. Booze is my problem. And Pee-wee was smart enough that he knew who he was talking to. And he looked across that big wide table we had there in our kitchen, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, Don, you're a damn liar. He said, I know how much you drink. And he said, I know what the booze has done to you and your family. He said, you forget that I used to drink with you. And he said, I used to drink that way. And he said, and I quit. He said, I found help. And he said, I can help you if you want me to. And he asked me to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know why I agreed to go, but I did. And it would be the following Thursday, and he said, can you stay sober till then? And you see, this pride of mine wouldn't let me admit that I couldn't. And I said, well, hell, yes, I can stay sober. I don't drink that much, only a couple beers a day, you see. But I found out it wasn't near as easy as I thought it was going to be, not drinking. I'd done a lot of shaking in the next 4 or 5 days. But I went to that meeting. And I remember that meeting, and I'll never forget it. There was about 5 guys sitting around the table, and I was 37 years old at the time. And these fellows all looked to me like they were about 60 or 65 years old, you know. And they'd all been down the road, and they started telling me parts of their story, you know, where they had been and what happened, you know. And I listened to them, and I said to myself, why, shoot, I'm not as bad as them guys. I never done all those things. You see, up to this point in my life, I had never been picked up for public intoxication, never been thrown in jail, you know, never had my license taken away. None of these things had happened to me that these people were sitting there telling me about. So I really didn't belong. I really wasn't one of those people. And they readily said they were alcoholics. And I didn't want to say what I was, you see. I didn't break the doors down trying to get there. And they asked me to come back. And I didn't understand why they wanted me to come back, you know, that if this was all they was going to talk about. And after that meeting, my sponsor took me over to his sponsor's house. Now, mind you, we were just being evicted out of a home, no place to live, and absolutely no place to go with 9 kids. And there was nobody going to rent you a house, you know, around our part of the country. And we drive over to this sponsor of mine's house, and we drive up in front of this $50,000-$60,000 home that's covered about 2 acres the way it looked to me, you know, all spread out, you know. And we drive in the back way into the big circle drive by the garage, and we walk into the garage, and steps into the kitchen are carpeted, you know, and the kitchen floor is carpeted, and man, I'm just looking all over the place, you know, looking at this house. And we sat down there, and we had a cup of coffee, and we talked, and I remember Bob saying to me, Don, he said, you know what, he said, I built this house with my own 2 hands since I've been sober. And you know, I'd been into construction work for a number of years. In fact, I'd been contracting some building on my own for a few years. And I could tell by just looking at the house how long it would take me to build one like that. I figured about 6 months. And I figured that's how long he'd been sober. And I said to myself, Self, you're going to have you a house like that in about 6 months. You know? And I told him, I said, Bob, I'll never drink again as long as I live. And as we walked out of the kitchen into the garage, he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, Don, he said, I'm sorry you said that. And I said, well, why? Ain't that what you want me to be sober? He said, you know, anybody that's ever told me that has never stayed sober. And I went out there saying to myself, Self, you're going to prove to him that you're going to stay sober. You're not going to drink. So I set out not to drink. Now, I didn't do anything else. I just didn't drink. And I continued to do all the things that I was doing before, you know, and I was one of these bar hoppers. I was one of these guys that hit the American Legion, you know, and sat up there till 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, gambling and shooting crap, playing poker, and all this kind of stuff, you know. And I continued to do that. I never stopped doing that, see. And so nothing got any better. Nothing got better. I just got more sick. But I wasn't drinking. And I couldn't figure out why my wife kept raising hell with me. You know, I'd come home about 2 o'clock after one of them nights at the Legion, you know, and I'd even have a pocket full of money. I couldn't hardly get no more in them. And I'd throw it on the kitchen table, and I'd say, here, love, look, we got all this money. And she stood there and bawled, and I couldn't understand why in the hell she was crying. And she hated me, and she told me, take your rotten money, you know. She didn't want this rotten stuff she wanted me home, you know, where I was supposed to be. And I told her I'm not drinking, you know. She wasn't a bit, that didn't mean anything to her that I wasn't drinking. And I couldn't understand that. And there was a lot of times I'd walk in that house and she'd say, you've been at it again, haven't you? You know. Hell, I'd get in them bars, you know, and the guy just spilled booze on me. Hell, I'm sure I smelled like booze. My eyes all bloodshot from that smoke, you know, dark rooms you couldn't see. Hell, I was hiding. But I didn't do anything. But I still kept going to those meetings, you know. And I remember some of those old fellows telling me, Don, you know that ain't the way it works. That ain't the way you stay sober. I said, fellas, you don't know how to get to them guys that's drinking. You guys are never go in bars. You're never out there where all the drunks are. How are you going to help anybody get sober? You're supposed to go in there where they're at, you know. And, you know, pretty soon when I walked in the bar and I got me a cup of coffee or a Coke, sat right down with my drinking friends, you know, in about 5 minutes my drinking friends all moved away. And I couldn't understand why. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. I was trying to get them all to join Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, and I was telling them how bad they drank and how they was losing everything, you know. And why don't you come to a meeting tonight? Hell, they didn't want to go to a meeting, and pretty soon the bartenders was wanting me to get out. You know, I got thrown out of a few of them bars drinking, and here I come in there sober, you know, and here they was wanting to throw me out of there when I wasn't drinking. And I didn't understand. And I know now, you know, I had another drunk in me, and I sure was getting ready for it, and these guys were telling me, but you see, this pride wouldn't let me admit that I was an alcoholic. And so I was just waiting for the right thing to happen for me to grab that bottle and go back to drinking. And it came along, and I took it, and I went back to that drinking. And I want to tell you that if you don't think it'll get any worse, it sure as hell got worse for me. I thought my life was a mess before then. But in the next 6 months, it really went downhill, and it went down fast. And I know there was many times in that 6 months that I wished I could die, and I couldn't. Alcoholics Anonymous members kept coming to me, you know, trying to get me to come back to meetings, and I didn't want to see them guys. I didn't want them around. And I told this one old boy, I said, just get away from me. I don't want to see you no more. Whenever I get ready, I'll come back. Whenever I get ready. And he'd say, okay, Don, okay. You know it's going to get worse. No, I'm going to quit. You know, and I kept this business up. And I had 6 months of this miserable sickness, you know, and wishing I could die. And them old boys told me, Don, before, if you go back to drinking, you're going to do some of the things that we did if you go back to drinking. And all at once I was finding myself doing those things that those guys had done. And I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop doing it because I wouldn't stop drinking. And a lot of part of that 6 months I was praying, you know, to God to get me, let something happen to me that I could get honest enough to get back sober, you know. And I was given that opportunity. God saw fit to put me in a position to where I could see myself. I ended up on a drunk driving charge and a possible manslaughter, ended up in jail with 6 crushed ribs, bleeding to death inside on the jail floor, and there wasn't anybody in there but me. And that was the way it was supposed to be for this proud old drunk that wouldn't admit that he was late. And I remember sometime during the night that I came to, and I'm crawling over to the jail door trying to get the sheriff to get me to the hospital, but nobody would answer. And I knew that I was going to die there on that floor. I just knew it. And I crawled to my feet, and I stood there against the wall, and I saw my past flashing before my eyes, exactly what I was. And I think for the first time in my life, I had a clear mind, like I told you before. I saw me for the first time in my life what I really was, and I didn't like what I saw. And death would have been sweet to me that moment because I could have died and just forgot all of it, you know. And yet I didn't want to die. And I also knew that God would help me from what those people told me in Alcoholics Anonymous if I'd let Him and if I would ask Him. So for the first time in my life, I got down on my knees voluntarily on that cold jail floor. And I didn't find myself asking God to get me out of the mess that I was in. All I was asking Him for is for Him to take my life and run it because I made a mess of it. And I found this sudden weight being lifted off of my shoulders. And I got out of that mess that I was in. I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I walked in those doors of that meeting, I no longer felt ashamed and I no longer felt guilty. And I knew what I had to do if I wanted to stay sober. And I started working this program. It took a long time for me to get to swallow that pride. You see, these 12 steps are pride swallowing. And I had to start swallowing that pride. And it's not easy. I balked at every one of those 12 steps. But they started working for me. And I found out that just skipping around over them, skipping from 1 to 3 to 5 to 9 wasn't working. I wasn't getting any relief. I found out that I had to start from the beginning. And I'm just as powerless today over alcohol as I was when I had my last drink, when I got sober, when I first came to AA. And I need Alcoholics Anonymous more today than I ever needed it back then. You see, I lost every loving thing that I ever wanted out of life out there drinking. I ended up with nothing. I had lost my self-respect and the respect of society. And I had nothing left when I sobered up. And you see, I have everything today that I ever wanted. When I was a young boy, I always dreamed, of having self-respect and people looking up to me and saying, Don, you're doing a good job, and all this type of thing. And today I have that. My children love me. My wife respects me. I have 13 children today. And I finally found out what's causing it. I found out that it wasn't the drinking, because I had 4 since I've been sober. But it's been a beautiful life in this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I found out that I had to really get involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had to get and start working this program to the best of my ability. We have a treatment program. There's 12 steps. It says in how it works. There's 12 steps to recovery. And this is our treatment. And unless I take and apply those steps to my life every day, I'm running around out here lollygagging, without being treated. They're my treatment. And they go right down the line. There's a lot of two-steppers in Alcoholics Anonymous. They take the first step and they start working on the 12th one, start passing the message. And in my opinion, they don't have a message at that time. In the 12th step it says, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. And I was trying to carry that message in the bar, And I sure as hell didn't have a message to carry those drunks. And I found out unless my house was in order, I had nothing to offer the alcoholics out there suffering. And if I was spiritually in good shape this particular day, or whenever I went to talk to somebody that was having a problem, I was always successful. But if I was all screwed up and unable to manage my own life, I didn't do any good, absolutely none. I didn't even help myself. So I found out that this program of Alcoholics Anonymous will work. It's worked for me, and it's worked for many others. By the grace of God and Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to drink since August of 1964. And there's no bragging there. I'm just very damn grateful that I've been able to have that daily reprieve from drink, one day at a time. And it's because I'm trying to be active in this program. I'm trying to work this program in my life. And it's not easy. It's still not easy to admit, that my life is unmanageable. And it still is. I can readily admit, I'm powerless over alcohol. And I've accepted that. But the second half of this step is still giving me problems, you see. My life is still unmanageable. And it's because I am still too damn proud. I'm not willing to let go completely. I still hang on to some of my old ideas, and it says that the results are nil until we let go absolutely. But I still hang on to some of them old ideas. I'm sure as heck not no saint. I find every day of my life that I do something that I wished I hadn't have done. I've said something that I wished I hadn't have said. So you see, I can take that 10th step every day, and I can find that I need to look back over my life, and I need to ask God to forgive me, and I need to make amends to somebody. So I can work this program every day in my life. I have to go back and take that inventory, and I've got to make amends so I can work every step every day. And especially that second step where he talks about this gopher running around up here someplace, this insanity there. Whenever I think that I can manage my life, I'm starting to get insane. When I know I can't, that I need help, that there's someone bigger than me that makes the decisions and that can take my life and make something of it. So you see, God's done for me what I'm incapable of doing for myself, and He does this for all of us. I don't know what time I started or whatever, but I've just been rambling up here. I've heard some things since I've been sober from other people, and they've helped me. There's an old boy not too far from here that's gone now. I'm sure there's some of you in this room that remember him, old Vic. He had a big part of my life in my early AA years. And he told me one thing that I'll never forget. And he told me, he said, Don, it don't take a big man, it don't take a smart one. It just takes all of them to work this program. And there's another little gal from down in Texas that I heard. In fact, she was up in this area one time for a short period of time, and we all got to love her. And I remember her saying at a meeting one night, when she closed her lead, she said, if you don't think that AA will work, you just try it. And if you don't think that God will help you, you just ask Him. And when I heard her say this, a cold chill went up down my back. And immediately I knew why I was having trouble. You see, I wasn't asking God to take my life because I was still hanging on to the old ideas. If I asked Him and really meant it, I'd have to let go. And I was still hanging on. So I knew right then that if I would ask God, He would help me. And I started letting go a little bit, and the miracles started happening. And I want to tell you that this whole sober life of mine has been filled full of miracles. And if you don't believe that they'll happen to you, you just let go, and you ask God to help you, and the miracles are going to start happening in your life, just like they did mine. There's no way that I could have come from what I was 15 years ago, facing that jail floor, on a drunk driving charge and a possible manslaughter, and lost all of my self-respect and $18,000, $20,000 in debt to what I am today, but for the grace of God. And today I have everything that I ever dreamed of in my life. And it's all because I've let go and let these miracles happen. And I couldn't stand up here. It took me all night to start telling you the miracles that's happened to me and my family. I really could. Everything that's happened has been in place just like it's supposed to happen. At times we don't understand why life is going the way it is. But it does. And everything seems to be getting better. Every day has gotten better for me. And I thank God for that. And as long as I stay here with you people and I'm willing to share with you people and to give away what was given to me, things are going to get better. They absolutely will. And there's a lot of AA friends that I've made since I've been sober that have been a contributing factor to me in my success. Not only staying sober, but financially. And I'm very grateful to these people. We have some here tonight that I'll never be able to pay. But it's because we've trusted and we've let go, and And we try to do the best we can, and this is when the miracles happen. When we're willing to give of ourselves, this is when we get it back. And I've got more than I ever deserved. If I got what I deserved, I wouldn't want it, you know. I guess God gives us what we need, and He gives us what we are able to handle. And maybe I'm getting a little better, maybe I'm getting a little more spiritual growth in my soul, that God has given me a little more to hold on to or to handle. I don't know, but I'm just taking it and hanging on to it and giving it away to everybody else, and it's working, you know, it just works. So I hope that maybe I've said something tonight that might have helped someone else. I know this is the second time that I've ever been up in front of a bunch of people like this. In fact, you believe, I was ready to go to the pub before I got up here, and now I don't have to go. But I remember the first time was up in Detroit, and there was 2,500 people in that auditorium, and I like to pass out when I get up in front of this mic. And I'm still shaking, and I'm still nervous, and I can feel it coming on now. I'm going to have to go to the pub again. But I want to thank all of you for being here, and you're here, and I'm here, and that's what it's all about. It's getting together and being able to share with one another. This is the way Alcoholics Anonymous works. And we can't find it out there someplace else. It's when we're with people like ourselves that we find this hope and joy and peace that comes to us, you know. And if you keep working at it, it's going to get better. So I want to thank all of you. Thank you, Dick, for asking me to come to this and be on this program. Thank you a lot, and I love all of you.